It's no secret that many of the prominent independent developers are inspired by the classics they grew up with. In fact, this is at the root of some of the most beloved indie games of recent memory. Shovel Knight, The Messenger, and 20XX are all true homages to the classics that came before them, but managed to set themselves apart by taking inspiration from the past and combining it with a well-executed, fresh idea to create something truly unique. I'm very pleased that we can add another title to this list, as Panzer Paladin by Tribute Games has managed to combine elements from well-known classics such as Mega Man and Blaster Master, while also tapping into some of the less frequently referenced games like Metal Storm to create an impressive, challenging, and memorable game that will stand the test of time. This shouldn't be too much of a surprise though, as Tribute themselves have stood the test of time, releasing a steady stream of quality games since 2011, including Mercenary Kings and the 2017 grappling hook gem Flint Hook. Over the past 3 years, the Montreal-based studio has been hard at work on Panzer Paladin, and after spending a little over a dozen hours with my new favorite mech game, their hard work has definitely paid off. At first glance, Panzer Paladin should remind you of any AAA release from the NES, with vivid visuals and varied environments having a palette that uses a lot more peach than I've seen. There is definitely a specific look created here, and that gives the game an identity all its own. With a future Earth in peril and under attack by demonic forces wielding otherworldly weapons of destruction, it is up to a team consisting of cyborg pilot Flame and her trusty mech Grit to harness the weapons acquired to save the world from imminent destruction. The overall structure of Panzer Paladin is where the Mega Man influences are most noticeable. There's 11 primary stages of impressive variety, each with a checkpoint or two, a recurring mini-boss who becomes a real treat to encounter throughout the game, and a final boss at the end of each stage that is usually some form of animal plus machine a la Mega Man X. After all of these challenging stages are completed, you will be taken to the final world. Think Dr. Wily's castle. But this is no 4-stage affair. Instead, I found that I spent almost as much time in this point-of-no-return final world as I did tackling the dozen levels before it. In fact, not being able to leave the final world to grind out weapons or collect extra lives is probably my biggest complaint of Panzer Paladin, even if it turns out that I never needed to do any of that extra legwork. This last world effectively doubles the level count and the scope of the entire game. You might have heard the phrase grind out weapons and wonder what that's all about, and that's where Panzer Paladin really shines. The levels and gameplay themselves are a mixture of multiple top-tier action platformers of the 8 and 16-bit generation. Movement is a bit slower and deliberate like Castlevania or Metal Storm, and there's plenty of opportunities to see the much quicker Flame jump out of her mech and use her whip for some risky platforming segments to redeem worthwhile upgrades and one-ups, very much like Blaster Master. Along the way, though, enemies you defeat will occasionally drop weapons, and you'll want to pick one up at every opportunity because every weapon in the game can and will break. But don't panic. The weapon system in Panzer Paladin is the genius invention that makes this title more than the sum of its parts and is executed flawlessly. At first, you'll carry a handful of weapons, but eventually amass an inventory of 100 or more. Each weapon falls into a class of sword, staff, axe, and the like, with varying stats for power, durability, reach, and special ability. Once you get used to the threat of temporary weapons, which really isn't a threat, you'll be encouraged by your team at home base to experiment with special abilities. These abilities are a single-use affair that will instantly break the weapon, but provide you with buffs, screen-clearing attacks, or a handful of other useful perks. And the faster you get comfortable with sacrificing your weaponry, the more fun you'll have with the game. While the weapons are yours to collect and use, these dark magic elements of destruction are what got Earth in this dire situation in the first place. To that end, the more weapons you hold in your inventory, the higher your dark magic level becomes, which makes bosses more difficult. So it's actually in your best interest, unless you're looking for a challenge, to keep your inventory a little lighter and use the cool special abilities whenever it's relevant. The weapon system, with its balance of enemy and weapon types, ability to swap weapons on the fly, durability versus special abilities, and the dark magic system all work in unison to create a mechanic that is always on your mind but never in your way. Even if the rest of Panzer Paladin wasn't fantastic, the weapon mechanic alone might just be enough to warrant a recommendation. Thankfully though, the rest of Panzer Paladin is wonderful. The music is industrial synth chiptune that feels right at home in an end-of-days mech story, and the graphics rival Shovel Knight's in their ability to walk the line between what would be possible on the NES and is still gorgeous today. The story is about as deep as you would expect in a title like this, but there are a couple of great twists and callbacks for those paying attention. If you couldn't already tell, the gameplay here is masterclass. As Grit, you feel heavy and powerful, but can still use boosters to assist with dash attacks, dodges, and the beloved pogo stick attacks originally made famous from DuckTales. While you only play as Flame for maybe 15% of the game, her sections are never a drag, and I always looked forward to the faster-paced whip-slinging action. In fact, during boss battles, if you're defeated as Grit, Flame will eject from the mech, and while she's tiny and weak in comparison to Grit, there were a couple of times when it seemed all hope was lost, but I defeated the boss as Flame, and it created some of my favorite gaming moments so far this year. Panzer Paladin was much longer than I originally expected, clocking in right around 10 hours for my first normal difficulty playthrough, but the game includes multiple difficulties which can be swapped at any time. Completing the story also unlocks a New Game Plus mode which features an entirely different ending to the story, and the weapon system lends very nicely to a second playthrough where you can start out armed to the teeth but still have to balance out the risk of your dark magic level. The included boss rush mode is some of the most fun I've had in one of those types of gauntlets in a long time, and the blacksmith mode is a simple yet intuitive feature that allows you to draw your own pixelated weapons and configure every single aspect to your choosing, and then upload them to the cloud so that others can see them drop at random during their own game, if of course they choose to. It's very difficult to talk about Panzer Paladin without mentioning both of the games which inspired it, as well as its indie contemporaries. But the mixture of elements from both, combined with the pixel-perfect passion from the team at Tribute Games, leaves us with a stellar, retro-inspired title that deserves to be in the conversation among the best-in-class, modern or classic. At the Nintendo Village, we give Panzer Paladin 4 out of 5 stars.